Well, greetings once again from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Very glad that you could join us for the latest in our ongoing series of virtual Voices of the Game programs. Today, we will be talking about really one of the best baseball writers out there, also becoming a pretty prolific author as well, Tyler Kepner, who has a new book out, The Grandest Stage, A History of the World Series. We will talk to Tyler about that book. We'll talk about the 2022 series between the Phillies and the Astros, and look a little bit ahead toward what might happen during baseball's hot stove season, which right now is relatively quiet, but that could change certainly as we move into early December. The winter meetings are around the corner, and also the first of two Hall of Fame elections. But joining us today, our main guest for this program is someone who's become a frequent guest with us. That is Tyler Kepner, a longtime national baseball writer for the New York Times. Tyler, welcome once again. How you doing?
Good, Bruce. Thanks for having me. Always happy to join you here. Or
so
there.
Tyler, very important. You were in a three-way tie with Jason Stark and Brian Kenny, all appearing twice on the Hall of Fame channel.
Oh, wow.
Now you are the leader with 3 appearances.
Really? All right.
We have created this award, the Kepner Cup.
Oh, boy,
it's in its early draft stage here. It's not exactly where we want it to be.
Yeah. It's not a cup. It's just a little, I don't even know what you'd call that. A smiling baseball. But
yeah, it's a little trophy. We could have called it the Kenny Trophy, the Kenny Cup, or the Stark statue, but it's the Kepner Cup for now.
Kepner Cup now. All right, I'll take it.
Yeah, we'll work on that and we'll improve its condition, and we'll have a nice label for you as well. On a far more serious note, Tyler has written several books now. As I said, his newest is A History of the World Series, The Grandest Stage, brand new book from Doubleday. Before that, he wrote A History of Baseball in 10 Pitches, K, a really interesting look at the art of pitching. He also did the introduction to the New York Times' book on Derek Jeter. Very early in his author career, Tyler wrote a chronicle of the Philadelphia Phillies. Tyler has worked at the New York Times now since 2000, and in 2010, 12 years ago, he became the national baseball writer for the Times. Prior to that, had been beat writer for the Mets and for the Yankees as well. We're going to talk about Tyler's book. We're going to preview the winter. We want to start, Tyler, by looking back at, well, it was not that long ago that the Philadelphia Phillies and Houston Astros gave us a 6-game World Series. We're going to look back not at every one of the games, because there were a few blowouts sprinkled in, but there certainly were some intriguing games, some interesting moments. We'll begin with Game 1, which in retrospect really ended up being the most exciting game. Might be regarded as a classic if the Phillies especially had gone on to win the series. So they come back from 5 runs down against Justin Verlander and the Astros, end up winning in extra innings. And we see the great catch by Nick Castellanos, the Phillies right fielder, makes a terrific game-saving play to end the bottom of the 9th and essentially set the table for the Phillies to win in the top of the 10th inning. You know, I think, Tyler, of Nick Castellanos, much criticized defensive player, sort of like Ron Swoboda, and much like Swoboda, comes up with a very important and phenomenal catch that's very important to his team's victory.
Yeah, Game 1 was just a lot of fun all the way through. I mean, when you come back from 5-0 on Verlander, and then grab that momentum back, but then the Astros are really just a few inches from winning it on that that quickly diving a little pop up there. Castellanos catches it, Real Muto the home run, and I had written Real Muto before the game, so you always like that, like the next day's paper would have a big Real Muto feature. So no, but that was great. That was really a classic game. I don't know how long it will be remembered as such, but as it was unfolding, it was a terrific Game 1.
Yeah, you think about a game like that, and sometimes the first game of a World Series where the heavy underdog defeats the heavy favorite, especially in a dramatic or unexpected way, sometimes that can create momentum. We saw it back in 1988 with the Dodgers and the
Sure.
Oakland A's. And we're
Yeah.
going to talk a little bit more about that series later on. As it turned out, the Astros did recover to win game 2. But after this first game, Tyler, did you think, yeah, the Phillies, they just might win this series?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, because we've seen the Astros lose a couple of the last 3 World Series in 19 and 21. So certainly we'd seen that before. And the Phillies won the first game of every series. And they really, I mean, it was a dramatic ending to this one with David Robertson, taking care of business there in his David Robertson way. That Rob Thompson managed it with a kind of intensity and urgency. And I remember David Robertson telling me after game 1, he's like, well, this was great because, as long as we can come out of here with a split, that we can close it out in Philly. And I was like, wow, they're thinking far ahead. But that's exactly what they did in San Diego. And that's exactly what they did in Atlanta. So, they won the first game there, lost the next one, and then went home and won all the home games. So there was no reason to think that it wouldn't happen again. And certainly when they get back to Philly and they hit 5 home runs off Lance McCullers in game 3, it's looking really good.
Speaking of that game, that tied a World Series record, the Phillies with 5 home runs, and that tied 3 other teams that had done the same in World Series play, the 28 Yankees, 1989 Oakland A's, and the 2017 Houston Astros. Home runs by Harper, Bohm, Marsh, Schwarber, and Hoskins. I'm curious about Harper in particular. I mean, everybody in baseball knows what a great player he is. And I think certainly the first 2 rounds of the playoffs built up his reputation in terms of a national audience. And while he didn't maybe have the World Series he would have liked to have had, do you think that this postseason in total, was this the postseason that really put Harper on the map, not just with baseball fans, but with the American public in a broader sense?
Well, I think he's always been the star. I mean, he was anointed as such, when he was a teenager, and then he goes on and makes the Nationals as he is still a teenager. He's 19 years old. He won an MVP there. He helped into the playoffs a bunch of times, and he got that $330 million contract. So it didn't put him on the map so much as I think it maybe put him in permanent marker on the map, let's say. Like,
yeah.
He in Philadelphia now, he showed early on that he really could connect with the fans and understood the fan base in a way that I don't know that anybody really anticipated he would. And now that he's backed it up with an MVP season and then a season where he leads the team to the World Series, he's one of, I think Philadelphians would say he's one of us, so he, to do it. And now you're right. I mean, he didn't have the best World Series, but as far as back-to-back swings in Philadelphia, where his final swing of the LCS is the go-ahead home run in the 8th inning. Mm-hmm. And then his first swing of the World Series is a home run. I mean, it was chaos. It was bedlam. It was all the great stuff you hear about and all the great stuff you want from your superstar. And didn't happen for them in games 4 and 5 there at home. Houston was just a little too good in the end, but I think Harper took them absolutely as far as he could. The sad thing is, the disappointing thing is he's got to, now he's got to finally get that surgery that he didn't have all last year, get back on the field. So he'll miss a little time next year, but 9 more years of Harper. And I think instead of thinking, oh man, 9 more years, people are really excited about that. It's a great investment so far.
I think early in his career, Tyler, he had a reputation for being a little short, a little curt with the media. He seems to have matured, though. He seems a little bit different, a little more open to talk. Do you sense that at all?
Yeah, I think, from being around them a little bit, and certainly from talking to the media there, he's terrific. I mean, he really sets a good tone for cooperation. I mean, as beloved and as great as those 07 to 11 teams were, they were not the most cooperative, with the media. It was a little bit tough sometimes to break through there. But most of these guys are pretty agreeable and accessible, and I think they follow Harper's lead in that regard. I think in Washington, a lot of it with Harper was just, really from day one, there was so much speculation about, is he going to stay? Is he going to go? What's the contract going to be? When you're a Scott Boras client in particular, I remember that from the A-Rod days in Seattle. It was always a constant topic. And I think it wore him down a little bit. And also he was very, very young. I think he's just, matured and grown into who he is as a person.
Talking about Game 3 specifically, a lot was made of Lance McCullers. It was very ineffective. He's hit hard in the early innings. A lot of people speculated that he was tipping his pitches. Was it a case of that, or was he simply making bad pitches?
There was not, there was certainly speculation during the game, upstairs that he might be, but afterwards it wasn't like the Astros were talking anything about that at all. Certainly McCullers didn't think so, and I mean, you can pick up stuff. We saw Harper saying something to Bohm, and then Bohm went out and hit a home run. But that's, that could just be on sequencing, or I mean, that's nothing really. That's just like, sharing what about, whether it was, how a guy holds his glove, or just what to expect in general. Like, hey, he's going to start you off with this kind of pitch. Like, I don't know exactly what it was, but it was good being a good teammate more than anything else.
Tyler, watching Lance McCullers Jr. these last few years, a constant reminder of how old I'm getting, because I remember his father, Lance McCullers Sr., was a hard-throwing reliever with the Padres and Yankees, ended up hurting his arm. At one point, he was going to be the next Goose Gossage. He was called Baby Goose early in his San Diego career. So I remember his father vividly, as well as watching the son now.
Yeah, no, I remember when he was a minor league prospect in the Phillies organization. I only knew of Lance McCullers Sr. as a name, but he was one of those names that they traded down the stretch in '83 for Sixto Lezcano. So I've told Lance Jr. that I'm probably one of the few people who knows of his father as a Philly prospect more than anything else.
Wow, I did not know that. Very good. Let's move on to Game 5, really Verlander's revival for the Astros after the disastrous Game 1. Bounces back 5 innings of 1-run ball, did walk 4 batters, but kept the Phillies off the board. Did you sense after Game 1 that he was particularly disappointed, having to face questions, yet another World Series disappointment? Or was he still pretty even keel after that?
Well, I think I felt like the whole Justin Verlander's never won a World Series game thing was really not even that big a deal until this year. I don't think people realized it. I always realized it. I mean, I mentioned it in the book, but it wasn't something that was a big topic of conversation around him or his legacy, and partly because he had 15 wins in the other rounds. I mean, he was LCS MVP against the Yankees. He was always great in that first round. Back with Detroit and everything, things just hadn't broken right for him in various World Series games. Either he didn't pitch well when he was worn out as a rookie, or Pablo Sandoval jumped him for some homers in 12, and then Houston the first time he was pretty good and in the first series, and then he was not so great in the second series against Washington, but most of that was later in the start. So he wasn't like horrible, even though the numbers were pretty bad. But then this first game, when he gave up the 5-run lead, really highlighted it. But here coming in Game 5, crucial game, but also knowing that they have 2 games at home, coming as it did after the the combined no-hitter in Game 4 by Christian Javier and 3 relievers. I think it put him in a good position to, be at his best. He had 4 days of rest, and he was not, in fact, at his best. I mean, he gave up a home run to Schwarber, and as you mentioned, some walks, but he grinded through. And you see this late in the season now, particularly veteran pitchers, it's tough. It's a grind to get through those 5 innings sometimes. They've got a lot of mileage on those arms, and it meant a lot to him to finally get a World Series win. And and credit to Dusty that it all worked out, that he was able to let him go 5 and not just have him pitch 3 1/3 or something. He's Justin Verlander. You trust the guy, and he rewarded that trust.
Yeah, sometimes we lose sight of fatigue. Here's a guy, late 30s, coming back from major arm surgery, was able to basically take the ball every fifth or sixth day for the Astros this year. It may have been fatigue, simply catching up to him by the end of the year, but it's pretty remarkable what this guy did from April to October.
Yeah, it really is. And he had a couple of starts late in the year where he was down for a bit, where he was on the shelf. But he got a Cy Young at 175 innings, rather than in the 200s. And a few years ago he lost one that way to Blake Snell. I know he knows that. That Snell had great stats, a sub-2 ERA, but he didn't come close to 200 innings. And now Verlander kind of did that this year, and he got the reward for it. But he had to sweat this one out, really. I mean, it was a great game. Game 5 was a terrific game. And, you mentioned there, Mancini made a great play in the 8th on a Schwarber hot grounder that was right to him. He just sort of scrambled off the bag and almost tackled it. And then of course, the catch by Chas McCormick in the 9th off Real Muto. Just a sensational catch that really preserved that win for the Astros. So tough way for the Phillies to lose it, but they didn't get a hit with runners in scoring position between from game 1 from midway through game 1 to late in game 5, and it's really, really hard to win that way.
Yeah. A couple of things about Mancini. Number one, if he doesn't make that play, I think it's very possible the Phillies go on to win the game. And number two, I think a lot of people, putting aside rooting interest, whether you wanted the Astros to win or not, Mancini has become such a good feel-good story for good reason these last couple of years, coming back from this bout with cancer. He struggles so much at the plate throughout the postseason. Any decent person had to feel good for him making that play.
Yeah, and it was his first defensive inning of the postseason, I believe, because he had just come in for Yuli Gurriel, who had hurt himself on a rundown, I think, at third base. So he wasn't even supposed to be out there. When he was holding the base, he was holding Segura on first, and if he hadn't been holding him on first, that ball would have gone right down the line. So he was just right there, right place, right time. And yeah, I mean, it was nice for his standpoint because what he's been through and off the field, and then to be over the postseason for so long, it was good for him to have a moment like that.
Now, a free agent, be curious to see where he ends up in 2023. Then the final game, game 6, Yordan Alvarez hitting that crucial clinching home run, even though it was only the 5th inning, but took a lot of the wind out of the sails of the Phillies at that point. And I think, Tyler, of all the decisions in this series, this was the one that was criticized, second-guessed the most. Thompson takes out Wheeler, who's pitching very well in the 5th inning, brings in Jose Alvarado, his left-hander, to face Alvarez. Didn't work out. Your opinion, right call by Thompson or a rare bad call by Thompson?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the 6th inning, actually, right? But because I felt like, I guess I just wasn't surprised, because at that point in the postseason, we'd seen Wheeler pulled a couple of times when he'd been pitching well. And then afterwards, he talked about, that was about all I had to give. I mean, remember, he had a late season little flare up with his elbow, and I felt like he was about 6th inning was about as far as he was going to go anyway. He had already faced a few guys in that inning. It wasn't like he got hit at all. I mean, Maldonado moved up on the plate, got hit by a pitch, and then you had, the broken bat by Altuve that was hit too softly to be a double play, and then a single up the middle by Pena. So it wasn't like he was getting dinged around, and he had gotten Alvarez already twice in that game, but I feel like the Phillies had dodged Alvarez that whole series, and eventually he was going to do something. And the way Thompson described it afterwards, he said, look, my best chance for a strikeout in that moment, because it was 1st and 3rd, 1 out. He wanted to keep the ball out of the air, and he thought the best way to do that was with his strikeout guy, Alvarez. Now, Alvarez had hit Alvarado. Alvarado had hit Alvarez earlier in the series in Philadelphia, and, it was no sure thing. But I can't kill him over that. I mean, especially in the series where the Phillies batted 163, lowest average ever for a World Series of at least 6 games. They had 71 strikeouts, most strikeouts by any offense in World Series history. So I can't get too caught up in that move by Thompson, because I just feel like as great a run as it was, the Astros for the Phillies, the Astros deserved to win that series. Phillies didn't hit enough to win it.
Yeah. One player we haven't talked about was named the MVP, Jeremy Pena. Knew he was a prospect coming up, knew he was the guy who was going to take over for the departed Carlos Correa, who signs a free agent contract with the Twins last year. Had no idea this kid was this good.
No, I didn't either. He didn't have a great season in terms of on base percentage or anything, but he's an excellent fielder, and he had those moments where he got hot, and he certainly showed you all the ability in the world. And Dusty kept him up there in that 2 spot, and it felt like every time in the postseason when Alvarez did something, it was right after a hit by Pena. Happened in both of the first 2 games of the division series with Seattle, and then it had, in game 3 of the division series out in Seattle, I was there. It was 18 innings, nothing until Pena connected in the top of the 18th. So he was Mr. Clutch really all the way through. He was the MVP of the LCS against the Yankees with a lot of big hits. So he deserved it. I mean, I thought you could have given it to Framber Valdez, because he was nails in winning games 2 and 6. But Pena, had so many little moments throughout the series, and they all added up to an MVP performance.
Let's talk a little bit about Dusty Baker, whom you mentioned a moment ago. I heard a lot of people in reaction to the Astros winning it all under Baker this year. A lot of these people very critical of Baker in the past. And they say, well, now Dusty Baker, he's much improved as a manager. He's much better than he was earlier in his career. I would counter and say, well, I think he's been an outstanding manager his entire career. Prior to this year, he'd already won 8 division titles. He'd won 2 pennants. I mean, I guess you could say he's evolved in some ways, but I think he's always been an outstanding manager. Who's right, them or me?
No, you are. I mean, his very first year, he took the Giants to 103 wins. They didn't get the playoffs because that was the last year before the expanded playoffs. But he was manager of the year his first go around, and then he got the Giants, sort of revived the Giants there, and got them back to the playoffs a couple more times, 3 more times, I think, 3 or 4 more times, and very nearly won the series in 2002. He took the Cubs to the playoffs. He took the Reds. He took the Nationals to the playoffs. So he's taken five teams to the postseason. He succeeded in 5 different places. So I don't really know how you can argue that he's anything but a Hall of Fame manager. I think sometimes when the guys have such a great personality and they connect with people so well, people perceive that as a strength, which it is, but they also then perceive something else as a weakness. It's like a catcher who's a great hitter. They don't maybe appreciate his defense as much because he's a great hitter. Dusty's a great communicator. He's a great guy. He's a great player manager. He sets the great vibe, but he's obviously doing something really right too, beyond just being a nice guy and a cool guy to hang out with. Because just look at his record. I mean, he knows how to win. He's won thousands of games, so he's glad that he's a champion.
He's 73 years of age, seems a lot younger physically. The way that he speaks, he's still got so much energy. He signed a 1-year contract to come back with the Astros. Do you sense that he's going to manage beyond 2023?
I don't know. I think he's his standard line was if as soon as I win 1, I'll want to see if I can win 2. Might as well try to go back to back. So I mean, it's good that he's gotten a chance and giving himself a chance to repeat. You could always say, just right off in the sunset now, but I don't know, man. The chance to repeat is something he hasn't had, and that no one's done since Joe Torre's Yankees. So I'm glad he's coming back. I don't know, how long he wants to keep doing it, but he's a baseball lifer, but he also has so many outside interests too. So I could see him giving it one more go this year, and then possibly hanging it up and hanging out with Darren, who's in the minor leagues, his son, or with his grandkids, or at his winery. I mean, Dusty Baker always stays pretty busy, and he has done broadcasting in the past for ESPN, TBS. He'd be welcome anywhere.
Yeah.
So he'll have options, that's for sure. And I'm glad he can, he has that ring now as a player and a manager. And whenever he decides to stop managing for good, he's going to have a spot there in Cooperstown. That's going to be quite a speech.
One of many great stories to come out of this year's World Series, Dusty Baker. All right, let's talk, Tyler, about your new book, which is fantastic. It's The Grandest Stage, A History of the World Series. One of the things I really liked about what you did here, instead of kind of doing the predictable, writing chapters about the greatest World Series ever and giving us that kind of narrative, you have taken a different approach. You've written chapters about the pressure of playing in the World Series, sidebar stories, unlikely heroes, managing in the series. You've also profiled some of the losing teams, which often get overlooked in this narrative. I think it's a great approach and it works really well. Why did you decide, though, to do it to begin with?
Well, thanks. Yeah, I knew for certain that I did not want to do a reference book or a chronology. There's plenty of those, and I always felt like if I'm a book buyer, if I go to buy a book on the Super Bowl history, let's say, and I look and it's only runs through Super Bowl 48 or something, then I'm like, well, they don't have the last few years. So I think a chronology naturally ends with the last one. And this one, while it certainly, has a publication date and all that, it's more universal themes that I think had two purposes, really. One is that it's somewhat timeless, that you'll be able to pick it up in 5 years. And sure, they wouldn't have anything about the series since it was published, but there's still the same sorts of themes that inform every series are going to be in this book. And also, it allowed me to explore all of World Series history within each theme. So it wasn't like if I mention 1903 on page 1, that doesn't mean I'm not going to mention it again on page 21 or 101 or 201. You can find stuff from all the history throughout all the chapters. So I like that idea. And also, honestly, there's just been so much stuff written about so many of the big moments. So if you're going to buy a book about World Series history, you probably know some of the basics. So rather than rehash a lot of stories that have been written and told so well for so long, why not kind of see if I could find some of the stories around those and add more texture, more layers to those well-known stories.
Let's talk about the first World Series that you remember. You were very young back in 1983. It's not a World Series that's particularly well remembered outside of Baltimore or Philadelphia, but this was the one that you kind of got started with. The Orioles defeat the Phillies, your team, 4-1. What moments, what memories do you most easily recall from this series?
Wow. Well, I recall almost everything from it, really. I still think about it a lot. Having the chance to go to game 4 in the afternoon and then game 5 in the twilight the next day. I just look at that photo there on the right of the Orioles celebrating. You see Dempsey in the middle with his glove that had the orange on the sides, like Lance Parrish also had. I see Eddie Murray there. You can see him in the back, and he had his name on the scoreboard. It came very close to hitting his name on the scoreboard. He had 2 home runs in game 5. You see the Fanavision guy, the camera guy over there on the side. This is Fanavision on his back. That was the new scoreboard that year up in center field. So I just, the novelty now of going to a day game in the World Series is pretty cool, because there hasn't been one since, in 35 years. So that's cool. And just the feeling of being there. The Phillies were down 2-1, and then they lose 4 and 5. But game 4 was really, really interesting and exciting. Both managers used their bench and their bullpen throughout the game. And it came down to, the very last batter, the winning run at the plate kind of thing. And Joe Morgan lined out. And then game 5 was a shutout by Scott McGregor, and it was very quiet and sort of sullen at the vet, because you could just tell the Orioles, just kind of like this World Series, the Phillies, like in the sense that the Phillies hit under 200 that series. I think they had 195. So they really didn't put together a whole lot of offense. But, I always look back and say, man, if they had just won, game 4 and tied it up, then they would have made sure to have another start for lefty down in Baltimore for game 6. And then surely they would have won that. And, so I extrapolated out in my mind. But really, the Orioles were, they were better. The Phillies just didn't hit much.
Some great players played for the Phillies. I mean, admittedly, toward the end of their career, it was the team known as the Wheeze Kids, but you had Tony Perez, you had Joe Morgan, you had Steve Carlton. Carlton, obviously, longtime Philly. The other two guys were, relatively new to the Phillies at that time. But in a way, this was sort of an end of an era for the Phillies, and they wouldn't go back to the postseason or to the World Series, I should say, for quite a while. So it's a team that did have some historical significance.
Definitely, yeah. And Pete Rose and Tug McGraw. It's interesting. Those games at the Vet were the final World Series appearances of Jim Palmer, Eddie Murray, Cal Ripken Jr., Tony Perez, Joe Morgan, Pete Rose, Mike Schmidt, and Steve Carlton. Wow. Those are eight pretty big names in baseball history right there. And none of them ever got back to the World Series. Eddie Murray did, I'm sorry, with Cleveland, but the rest of them, Cal was a very young player. He never made it back. Palmer, that was his last one of his 6 that he played in. Schmidt and Carlton and Rose, it was the end of the line for that Phillies group. So, it was, then you had the Sarge, Gary Matthews, who was, he was so charismatic and clutch, and Gary Maddox, and I could name all of them, but it was, Mike Schmidt was 1 for 20 with a broken bat single, but he was MVP in 80, and we talked about that for the book. How well he handled the pressure in 80 and how much he let the pressure get to him in 83, and I thought that was really interesting about how same guy, same stage of his career could struggle like that.
Yeah. Well, it's a reminder that you can't take a World Series appearance for granted. You never know that first World Series appearance could be your last. There's no guarantee of getting back. Many people talk about the 1975 World Series as the greatest of all time. You've got it in the top 10, but you don't have it at the top of the list. Certainly you think of Carlton Fisk and his home run against Pat Darcy in extra innings. You think of the Reds coming back in game 7. The guy I find really fascinating is the guy on the left, Bernie Carbo, who really hit, in some ways, a more dramatic home run. The Red Sox were down, 3 runs, 8th inning. Carbo had looked awful earlier in the at-bat against Raleigh Eastwick. And then somehow, he puts it all together later in the at-bat, hits a home run. And then here's a guy that we learned later on, he was, heavily involved with alcohol and drugs. We had him here at the Hall of Fame a few years ago for our author series, and he talked openly about, how that really affected his career. So you see a player like that and accomplish what he did on that stage is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it really was. Carbo's home run was in some ways a lot more significant than Fisk. I mean, Fisk, won the game and kept it going, but they don't even get there. The Reds win that game in 9 if he doesn't have that swing off Raleigh Eastwick. And the funny thing I learned in researching it was that Sparky Anderson was just despondent with himself for not calling for the lefty Will McEnany during that at bat is what he wanted to do. To have Eastwick start him out and then have McEnany come in and throw breaking balls to Carbo to strike him out. I mean, Sparky had Carbo in Cincinnati and thought that he knew him. But yeah, Bernie had the big hit that night. But I think he started the next game, game 7, and didn't do anything. So game 7 is much less remembered, but it was a classic game in its own way, with Morgan getting the big hit off of a young lefty named Jim Burton, who was little used, but for some reason Darryl Johnson put him in the big spot for hopefully to have the left on left advantage. Threw a good slider, but Morgan just blooped it in there for the go ahead hit.
Tyler, have you ever interviewed Bernie Carbo?
No, he actually, he was one who didn't, who I wasn't able to get a hold of. He just wasn't, he wasn't going to talk for this one, so that's fine. I mean, most guys I tried did talk, but it was okay. I mean, I talked to Rick Wise actually, as he was the winning pitcher in Game 6, and we talked about his contributions to Game 6, going through a tough part of the Reds order and winning it.
Now, the World Series that you do put at the top of the list is a great series, no question. The 1991 series. This, in your mind, the greatest of all the World Series. What sets this apart from maybe 75 and some of these other fall classics?
Well, I thought this one was the best beginning to end. I thought the intensity of it, the fact that both teams were last place the year before, worst to first. The Braves were new on the scene, and you kind of knew they were going to stick around for a while. Every game was won by the home team, which had only previously happened in '87 when the Twins were also in it. It just felt like I think the fans made a lot, had a lot to do with it, and you could just tell that from watching on TV. Game 6 and 7 were extra inning games, where Hall of Famers doing Hall of Fame stuff. Kirby Puckett winning it with a homer in Game 6, and Jack Morris 10-inning shutout in Game 7. You had some great, games in Atlanta. One of them extra innings, the other one won in the 9th inning. The first two in Minnesota were good. I thought it was thrilling beginning to end, thrilling and loud, and first series in 31 years that ended with a hit too, first since Mazeroski. So we hadn't seen that.
Talking, Tyler, about the 1991 World Series, we got a couple of photos here that, in some ways, I guess, sum up some of the events there. The photo on the left, Lonnie Smith crashing into Brian Harper, the Twins catcher. I guess that's a scene we'll never see again, given the way rules have changed, the lack of contact on the field. That's a throwback to early 90s baseball.
Yeah, it really was. And you watched on TV and you see Jack Buck say, "Wow, that's hardball," and it really was. I mean, Lonnie Smith was very much not a good base runner. He was fast, but he was nicknamed Skates going back to his Philly days. And on that play, he was a dead duck at the plate, so he just tried to plow into Harper and dislodge the ball, as guys did in that situation back in the day. And Harper held on, and and Lonnie Smith, of course, became the GOAT of Game 7 because he hesitated on his way from first to third on Terry Pendleton's double late in that game, and he couldn't pick it up in the Metrodome. He didn't know where it was, so he probably should have scored on that. Yeah. But the irony of that is that Lonnie Smith, he won the World Series with 3 different franchises, the only player to go with 4. And he had a grand slam against Jack Morris the next year in the World Series, but in that moment he didn't score, and then Sid Bream hit into a double play to end that inning, and of course the Gene Larkin won it with a single off Alejandro Pena to win the game.
That's Larkin on the right with his right arm raised after delivering what, under more ordinary circumstances, might have been a sacrifice fly. But the Braves were playing the outfield in with the series winning run at third base. The ball ended up dropping behind the Braves left fielder. It was scored as a single. He was the other Larkin of the 90s. Barry, of course, the better known, the Hall of Famer. Gene Larkin, basically a bench player, a role player for most of his career, but that one moment of series glory.
Yep. Yeah, and he talks about how he stayed in. He's a New York guy. He went to Columbia. That was always the story about Gene Larkin. Was he was the first player from Columbia, I think, since Lou Gehrig, and broke Lou Gehrig's records at Columbia. And, certainly good enough to play in the big leagues for several years, but never really was a regular. Kind of an outfielder, first base type, and they had plenty of those, obviously with Herbeck. But he came through when it mattered most, and obviously everybody still tells him all about it. He has a baseball school there in Edina, Minnesota, and he said it used to be the kids would tell me they remember it. Now it's the grandparents who tell me they remember where they were. But he's gotten a lot of mileage out of that, as he should. It was quite a moment.
Is he running that school full time, or does he have other interests as well?
When I talked to him a few years ago, it was him and a minor leaguer named a former minor leaguer named Tom Neppers who ran it together, and that was their post-career business there in the Twin Cities.
One other interesting player, well, there's many interesting players in that series, but a guy that I got to know a little bit because I used to work in the Utica, New York area, and that's where Mark Lemke is from, Whitesboro,
Sure.
New York, not too far from here in Cooperstown. He bats .417 for the Braves. He was never known as a great hitter, but he had a tremendous series. And I think if the Braves win Game 7, he probably ends up winning MVP.
He may have, yeah. I mean, he was the star of that series, and he was a real phenomenon as it was going on. Everybody sort of wondered, who is this guy? Mark Lemke. One of those classic unsung hero types. He ended up making the last out against the Yankees 5 years later with Wetland pitching. But he had his just a remarkable run through that World Series there, hitting, spraying the ball all over the place and sort of being in the middle of everything for Atlanta.
He's a good guy, very humble, hard worker, and even though the Braves did come up short, it was great to see him get some praise and adulation after that 91 series. You talk about unlikely World Series heroes. Here's a guy that certainly is high on that mountain. Al Weiss in the 1969 World Series, Game 5, hits a crucial home run against Dave McNally, very good left-hander for the Orioles. Do you think he's the most unlikely home run hitting hero in series history?
He might be. I mean, he's certainly one of the last guys you'd ever expect to hit a big home run, and he just had a great series. He could have been the MVP. It was Don Clendenin, but he was called Weiss was a little guy. He was called the Mighty Mite, and Volkswagen gave him a bug, a VW bug, because they nicknamed it the Mighty Mite. And he said it was great to have in the snow where he lived in Chicago, is because the engine was in the back, and so for some reason it handled the snow great. But yeah, he's still with us. He was talking about how his son telling his it was his son's birthday, and he told his wife, Dad's gonna hit a home run for me at my birthday. And it was so ridiculous because Al Weiss didn't hit home runs. He never hit a home run at Shea besides that, but he did. He came through when it mattered most.
One of the things I should mention about your book is it has photographs, which is normal, but you have some really nice color photographs. A lot of baseball books are strictly black and white, but you've got a mix of color and black and white. One of the photos in the book, and I find this one particularly interesting, is the 74 World Series, a crowd shot. We see the famed actor Rock Hudson and the always controversial Oakland A's owner Charlie Finley. One of the reasons I found this photo interesting is in recent weeks, I've been watching on the weekends Rock Hudson's old television show, McMillan and Wife. It's on every Saturday afternoon on the Cozy TV network. And I only vaguely remember it back in the 70s. I was very young, but it's a really good show. Hudson's married to Susan St. James, and they kind of work together to solve crimes. He's the San Francisco police chief. She's sort of an amateur sleuth with a lot of common sense. But I just think this is a great photograph. Rock Hudson, Charlie Finley, standing next to each other at the World Series. Do you know any of the backstory here? Why were they in the same seats or in the same area of the stadium? This is Game 4, and I assume this is in Los Angeles. No,
that's in Oakland.
Oh, it is in Oakland. Okay.
Yeah, you could tell because the slanted sort of dugout roof there, which has been yellow for many years, but I guess it was green there. I don't know the backstory of why Rock Hudson was at that game, but I took the photos very seriously for the book, and I'm glad you noticed that. I love that particular. Yeah, I could have chosen anyone for the A's, but I like that one because Finley, as controversial and as much of a rascal as he was, there was a lot of Finley's imprint on those three championship teams in Oakland. So I thought it was a cool picture. I thought it looked like, with a green jacket. I love pennants, and he's holding the pennant. And I just felt it was like a sort of stylish and self-aggrandizing rich guy showing off there. And I just, with a celebrity next to him, with the garish outfit, holding up the pennant. I love the angle of it. So yeah, I'm glad you noticed that. All the photos have a meaning. In fact, there's a picture of the Phillies of the Blue Jays finishing off their 15-14 win over the Phillies in '93, and I made sure the line score was in it, and then which tells the story of the crazy game it was as the Blue Jays were filing off the field. And there's also a Tasty Cake advertisement, and I made sure that was cropped just so you could see the Tasty Cake ad, because I'm a big Tasty Cake guy and a big Philly guy. So I try to do a lot of those little fun things stylistically in the book.
And for some of our younger viewers, they may not realize Rock Hudson was a huge star in the early 70s. McMillan and Wife was a top-rated show, was part of their rotating Sunday night mysteries that appeared as part of a kind of a regular rotation. So he was incredibly popular. Obviously, the A's are in the midst of their dynasty. One other interesting note about this photograph, this is a rare photo of Rock Hudson wearing glasses. I believe he was badly nearsighted. He needed glasses, but when he did his movies, he almost always took them off to portray his characters. He hated being photographed with glasses, but obviously had to wear them to see the game. So this is a rare shot of him with the spectacles.
Interesting. I did not know that.
One
Speaking
of the
spectacles, there's Mike Davis.
Yeah, the sidebar stories are very interesting in the book. One of the prominent names in this category is Mike Davis. Mike Davis was the Dodgers starting right fielder, as I recall, 1988. We all know about Kirk Gibson, what he did in game one against Dennis Eckersley. But Mike Davis was the little-known guy who really set the table. I think it may have been a pinch hitting appearance, and he draws the walk with 2 outs to keep that thing going. Without him reaching base, we don't have Kirk Gibson becoming the hero.
Yeah, it's really amazing to deconstruct that inning, because it's Oakland's leading and 4-3, I think, and there's 2 outs, nobody on, and Gibson, we all know was inspired by Vin Scully saying that he wasn't going to play tonight, and so he's taking swings in the batting cage. Again, these are some of the things that have been recalled over and over in many areas, which is why I wanted to focus on the fact that Gibson almost didn't get to the plate. They took the risk of, they could have put Gibson up as the tying run, and try to get him to hit a home run and tie the game. But Gibson had said, basically he was calling the shots. He told he got word to Lasorda, you pinch hit for the pitcher, or you pinch hit for Griffin and I'll pinch hit for the pitcher. And so, or you have somebody pinch hit for Griffin and I'll pinch it for so Tynan liked Mike Davis. Mike Davis had been a bust as a free agent. He hit 196 and he only hit 2 home runs. The year before he had 20 at the break for Oakland. He had a few good years for the A's. But he came to LA as a free agent and just didn't do anything. And he was telling his teammates that, God was going to make sure he hit a home run in this World Series, and they were all laughing at him, not because they didn't believe in God, but because they didn't believe in Tommy. They didn't believe Tommy was going to let him get off the bench. But he comes up there, and the key was that he is facing a former teammate with the A's and Dennis Eckersley. And so Eckersley never walked anybody. In fact, he faced over 90 batters in the postseason after this. He never walked any of them. But he walked Mike Davis, and he gave him a little too much credit because he remembered Mike Davis as a power threat with the A's. So he pitched him too carefully. He should have just gone right at him. He was Dennis Eckersley, and this is a 196 hitter. But he picked and he lost his control and put Eckersley on base, or put Davis on base. Gibson's up. Davis steals second during the at-bat, which was risky enough in itself, but it allowed Gibson to think small during that at-bat rather than just trying to hit a home run. And so we all know what happened, but it doesn't happen without a walk from a guy who really didn't even, a hitter who was so impatient, really didn't draw many walks. That's one of the reasons the A's got rid of him. Sandy Alderson was there, and he liked on base percentage guys. So it was just a crazy confluence of events that had to happen for the craziest thing of all to even have a chance to happen.
One final World Series memory, just a couple of years ago, 2020, Blake Snell taken out after 5 1/3 innings, having thrown just 73 pitches. At that point, the Rays were leading the Dodgers. The Rays, who had a terrific bullpen, deep bullpen. This was one of the few games where the bullpen did not get the job done. Kevin Cash took a lot of criticism for the move, both at the time that he made the move, but also after the Game 6 loss. It's really a clash of baseball philosophy. The Rays, the new belief is don't ever let your starter face the lineup the third time through. The old school baseball people say, no, watch the game. Snell was pitching great. Keep him out there. Your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it's funny because when the Wheeler Alvarado decision came down, it was the exact same part of the game, and I didn't really have a problem with that one, just because, like I said, Wheeler that was sort of his limit anyway. But I felt like Snell in that game just was dominating so much. He had struck out those top Dodger hitters. Betts wanted no part of them, and all those guys. But Cash, I think if anything though, what Cash's biggest problem with that was, I don't think he should have taken him out. I think first of all, I think what happened was that Snell did what they had hoped he would do. He had done his job, get the game to the 6th inning or so and let the bullpen take over. That was how they scripted it. And so when he had done his job, I don't think there was much thought that he could do even more than his job. Like he could have one of those special nights where he throws a shutout in the World Series and leaves it all out there. I think that really wasn't part of the plan, that he could be doing so much better. He met the requirement or the expectation, and they were happy with that. If they had had a better option in the bullpen than Nick Anderson at the time, to me, it would have made a little more sense because, Mookie Betts, it's a great hitter, and they just give it up a hit. It was a 1-run game. But Nick Anderson was fried at that point in the season. He had given up a bunch of runs in all of his outings. Great pitcher that year, but he was exhausted. And so I felt like it was the wrong choice to go to Nick Anderson. But you know what? You really never know. I mean, I had it on the background the other day, Game 7 of the '86 series, watching, Bruce Hurst was shutting out the Mets through 5 and, on short rest. But they let him out there for the 6th, third time through the order, and he gives up 3 runs, and now the Mets are back in it. It's 3-3. Maybe they should have pulled him after 5, and you just never know, because this idea of preventative, I call it peacekeeping rather than putting out the fire, rather than being a fireman, right? Like what he's trying to do when you pull out a pitcher from a shutout is to keep the peace, keep it where it is, not let things get on fire before you send in the guard. So I don't know. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it sure didn't work there.
Just a couple of minutes remaining with Tyler Kepner. I did want to talk briefly about Major League Baseball's hot stove season, which figures to be much more interesting this year than last year. Last year, we were talking about that impending lockout. The winter meetings were canceled. That is not going to happen this year. Already, we've had some interesting developments, including essentially the firing of James Click, the Astros GM. Were you surprised by that as everyone else?
Not really, because you heard so much rumbling about it, that he and Jim Crane didn't really see eye to eye on a lot of things. I think, Crane very smartly hired Jeff Luhnow when he bought the team, and Luhnow really built that thing up, and he fired him because of the sign stealing scandal. And I think it's just sort of a power thing. Crane is very proud of the organization he's put together, and he's been a lot more hands-on since the sign stealing scandal. And maybe he feels empowered to keep doing things his way, or at least find a top lieutenant who would do things his way. So it's his prerogative as the owner. But I think the best thing that Click did was really recognize what a great organization Luhnow had left him. Even though Luhnow made a lot of enemies along the way because he was a disruptor kind of guy, he figured out a lot of things too, and Click built on that and kept a lot of the pieces in place, figured out a way to continue the player development machine that the Astros have there. So I guess on the surface, I would be surprised that they would get rid of the GM after he wins the World Series. I mean, what could be more easy than just bring the guy back? But hearing that the working relationship was not that great, and knowing that Crane maybe wanted a more comfortable setup, it wasn't too surprising, really.
The number one free agent, Aaron Judge, meeting with the San Francisco Giants. Supposedly today, he's made a trip to the Bay Area. I don't want to ask you where you think he's going to sign. Rather, I want you to tell me, what do you think is going to happen in terms of the timetable? Is this going to go on for a long period of time, or might this get wrapped up before the winter meetings?
Yeah, you never know. I mean, I've learned over the years to always bet the over on this stuff. Like, it always seems like it's a surprise if something big happens early.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you'll get a situation where they want to wrap something up before the winter meeting, so there's not some kind of frenzy. But I mean, Judge is controlling this pace. He said on his conference call after winning the MVP that he'd like to have it happen sooner rather than later, so whatever team he joins has as much chance as they can to go out and add around him. But I think it's still somewhat of a mystery what Judge really truly wants. I think what he really truly wants is to be the highest paid position player in baseball and to do it on the Yankees. That said, it seems like it should be easy to make that happen. Yankees have money. Judge doesn't have to prove anything anymore. He had an amazing platform season. But he didn't come this far in free agency to not listen to what other teams have to say. Yeah. So I understand and respect the need to see what else is out there. And, if people are competing for your services, it really does make sense just to see what they say, just to see if anyone is so motivated to say, you know what, we love you so much out here in San Francisco, we're going to make you the first $50 million player a year, like something wild, like you don't know what they're going to say unless you actually hear them out. So I think Judge is sincere when he says he really wants to come back to the Yankees. I do know that he really cares about his teammates and they love him. There's unfinished business here. He's never gotten the series. But he's got to hear what everybody else has to say, just in case someone makes him that proverbial offer that you can't refuse.
Yeah. Final question for Tyler Kepner. The winter meetings are returning, first time since 2019. You're not going to be there because I guess the Times has another reporter that lives close.
Yeah, we have a veteran baseball writer named Scott Miller, who is just a delight to work with, just a wonderful guy and writer. He's not full time with us, but he does as much freelance as we can take, and so he's out there, and it's just a perfect setup. I mean, he lives in San Diego. He's running a ton of baseball for us, so I can work the phones or write from here at home. But Scott's going to be on the scene for us. Yeah.
You were telling me off air, though, this is not an easy event to cover, the winter meetings.
No, it's morning. It's up early, you're up early, you're staying up late. You're always kind of on the clock because you never know when something could happen. And there's rumors flying around. There's certain availabilities that are set up in advance, but a lot of times it might just be, Scott Boras is talking over here, or this general manager is walking through the lobby and you grab them. And so it's fun to see a lot of people within the baseball industry. I like a lot of people in the baseball industry, a lot of friendships. But if it were purely a few day event in a hotel and to see some friends and catch up, it'd be great. But the fact is you got to work and you got to write something every day. And this idea that they're used to of what the winter meetings used to be, it really hasn't been that way in decades, which is, GMs talking openly about the trade offers and actually making deals, and guys coming to the winter meetings, Barry Bonds coming and signing his big contract and talking about it like that. That doesn't really happen much anymore. they don't use that podium that they set up all that often. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of smoke, but not always not a lot of that inferno that we always expect.
Yeah, there's not going to be an owner like Bill Veeck did back in the mid 70s, where he puts a table out in the lobby and basically puts up a sign says "Open for business. Let's talk trade." That doesn't occur.
Exactly. No. And even you go back on, the archives and you look at the way winter meetings were covered in 1980, 81, all the early 80s, late 70s, mid 80s, whatever. Like a lot of GMs were just really talkative. There was no tampering rules, I guess, or whatever, but they would just say, we'd like to trade, Ryan Sandberg and Randy Lurch for Sixto Lizcano, but they want us to throw in another prospect. It's just like, you don't get that on the record stuff anymore. A lot of it is stuff that you would text or get on the phone, and you could do that from your home anyway. So anyway, it's pluses and minuses, but I'm glad to be sitting this one out.
Our guest has been Tyler Kepner, talking about a number of topics, including his wonderful new book, The Grandest Stage, A History of the World Series. Brand new. It's available Amazon.com, probably at your local bookstore. I know that we'll be stocking it shortly here at the Baseball Hall of Fame as well. Tyler, as always, we thank you. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot for having me, Bruce.
All right. Keep in touch. Tyler Kepner has been our guest. We thank him for joining us this past hour plus. We thank you for being with us too. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.